Underneath this ring, a main patch of skin hints at what Igor has been through in the past 6 months. A steelworker from Mariupol who tried to burn off his tattoo of a Ukrainian trident. He was surrounded by the enemy, and that symbol could lead to his death.
How did you remove your tattoo?
Там стояли буржуйки, которыми отапливали бараки. Уголек оттуда взял и приложил.
Igor would only give us his first name. It's clear why. He and his family survived the siege of Mariupol and their attempts to escape it. This was the building where they used to live. It's where they hid in the basement before it was destroyed by the relentless barrage around them. 2 of his neighbors were killed.
Чудом с семьей остались живы. И потом еще неделю мы прятались в подвале соседнего дома с семьей.
By mid-March, they knew they had to get out. They tried to flee along with tens of thousands of others. But in a city surrounded by the Russian military, it meant going through their checkpoints. Igor said when soldiers saw that tattoo under his ring, he was sent to a filtration camp and separated from his family.
Никак не мог связаться, и даже они не знали, где я находился. Вот в течение этого месяца никак я не мог связаться с семьей.
It was in the camp where he tried to burn off his tattoo before even more soldiers saw it. He spent 30 days there sleeping on a wooden pallet on the floor. Today he's in a much better place. Igor and his family are safe, even if they're living in close quarters, staying on a cruise ship anchored in Tallinn, Estonia. It's serving as temporary accommodation for Ukrainian refugees.
So the refugees that are here, what route did they take to end up in Estonia?
Yeah, so many of them nowadays come through Russia.
Kirill Badecki is a crisis specialist working on this ship, trying to help refugees who not only fled a war, but had to escape through what many saw as enemy territory.
They've lost their homes, they lost their families, they are traumatized, of course, so we provide also the psychological help here on ship and in the information points as well where they arrive.
Officials estimate that around 2 million people have been forced to flee to Russia since the war began. In the days before the invasion, Russia evacuated women and children from Donetsk. In the weeks and months after, many from eastern Ukraine couldn't find a safe way out. Their only option, to get on buses and trains destined for all across Russia. The country has painted this as a humanitarian mission, while Ukraine sees it as a mass deportation of its citizens. Natalia and her daughter were among that group.
Мы бежали, уже у людей была паника. Люди переступали даже через трупы.
With bombs falling around them, Natalia and her 17-year-old daughter ran out of Mariupol in early March before finally getting on a bus to Russia. Today, she's 200 kilometers southeast of Moscow. While she agreed to be interviewed, most Ukrainian refugees in Russia are too terrified to speak publicly.
Есть такие, которые нас и ненавидят. Они это не скрывают. Есть те, которые готовы поделиться последним куском хлеба.
Back in Estonia, right along Russia's border, 22-year-old Dmitry has just crossed over into the EU. After he fled Ukraine, his family went to Moscow. His parents and younger brother are still there, but he couldn't handle being in Russia any longer.
Сейчас. Я сказал им, что уезжаю в Европу. Они сказали, хорошо. Я сел на автобус и уехал. И все.
He's now sharing a room in a hostel with 2 families from Kherson. Before they fled through Crimea in August, they deleted pictures off their phones because they knew they would be searched.
Мы выехали через вражескую территорию. То есть мы тихонько спілкувались не на українському.
For months, they hoped to stay in occupied Kherson, but the violence didn't stop. And now there are fears that it could soon ramp up even more as Ukraine tries to retake the region.
Мы надеялись, что все-таки что-то изменится к лучшему, а ничего не менялось. Тяжело смотреть на ребенка маленького, который не может пойти на улицу, спокойно погулять на площадке, потому что каждый день мы с утра до вечера слушаем взрывы.
Once out of Ukraine, it only took the family a few days to reach Estonia. But for Igor and his family, their journey took weeks. Volunteers helped them get to the Estonian border, but Russian guards wouldn't let them out. He didn't have his passport. He never got it back from soldiers at the filtration camp. All they gave him was a photocopy with a stamp from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. So the family headed back south, eventually crossing into Belarus, then driving north.
And how did it feel when you finally reached Estonia?
Хороший, вздохнул спокойно уже. Я уже думал, оттуда не вырвусь.
They made it to the EU, but the challenge now starting over. Finding a job and enrolling the children in school, all in a country where they don't speak the language.
Мы не расстраиваемся, надеемся, все будет хорошо.
They aren't sure if they're ever going to be able to return to what was their home, but they're no longer trying to flee, and instead are focused on building a new life.
Briar, what more do we know about the people who fled through Russia?
Well, Adrienne, the experience was varied and it depended on when people left and how they left. But we do know that Ukrainian refugees were sent to 55 regions across Russia. And researchers with Human Rights Watch took a look at the whole screening process that was used by Russian soldiers. And they found that it was so invasive and punitive that it basically amounted to an illegal privacy search. You had people's phones being searched, their contacts being downloaded, fingerprints being taken. So not only was it a privacy breach now, but the researchers say for some of those refugees, it could have long-lasting implications.
Given that chaos, any sense as to how many Ukrainian refugees are still there?
No, there's not any public data on that, so it's hard to ascertain. But what we do know is that for some refugees, it may be hard to get out. You have some in very remote regions of Russia, and they may not know what their options are. And there are Russian volunteers that help to get refugees out with transportation and logistics. But all of those things are organized on social media. So if somebody doesn't have a cell phone, if they're not connected to the different platforms, it can be hard to get in touch with the right people to help you figure out just how to leave Russia.
All right, thank you. Briar Stewart in London.
You're welcome.